Welcome to episode 82 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's January 21, 1962, and today we're in Addis Ababa, high altitude, thin air, and a stadium that feels less like a venue and more like a national stage. Because on this day, Ethiopia win the Africa Cup of Nations by beating the holders, the two-time champions, the United Arab Republic. And that single result becomes one of the defining early proofs that African football is not a sideshow of the global game. No, it is its own continent-wide story, with its own politics, its own pride, and its own pressure. Today we'll do three things. We'll go back to the beginning, to how the AFCON is born, and why it starts as something small but symbolic. We'll build the two main characters, Ethiopia and the United Arab Republic, and the people inside them. And then we'll live the tournament itself, the semis, the final, the comeback, and the extra time moment that turns a home tournament into a national legend. AFCON in the early years is not the almost month-long 24-team spectacle we know from today. It's young, it's fragile, and it's political. CAF is founded in Khartoum, Sudan's capital, in the early February 1957, and the first AFCON, played in Khartoum in the days following CAF's founding, has only 4 nations participating, because the continent's football institutions are still forming, literally, and because the continent itself is in the middle of rapid decolonization and identity building. And this is not a neutral environment. In that first AFCON, South Africa is effectively pushed out for its apartheid policy of refusing to field a multiracial team. So from the beginning, African football is not just about sport. It's about what kind of continent this is going to be. And Ethiopia matter here. They're not just participants. They're founders, part of that early institutional core. And Ethiopia's national team is already a real football culture, playing international matches before many African nations even have stable national leagues. In the first AFCON, Ethiopia reached the final because their semi-final against South Africa is then scratched, and they lose the final to Egypt. In the second AFCON, in 1959, they're still in the mix, yet lose out to Sudan and the eventual winners, United Arab Republic, which essentially was Egypt. I'll get back to that. So when Ethiopia is selected to host the third edition, the 1961 tournament, this is not charity. It's a statement. One of CAF's founding members is staging the competition in its capital and on its own terms. And this tournament is different in one key way. For the first time, so many nations, 9 in total, wanted to play that qualification was needed. That sounds normal now, but it exposes the reality of African football administration at the time. Uneven organization, withdrawals, disputes, and improvisation. In fact, even the scheduling slips. The tournament is pushed back to January 1962 from the prior year because of stadium work. It is a young competition living in a young infrastructure environment. And yet, once the football starts, it's electric. Now meet the holders, the United Arab Republic. In 1962, that name still carries political weight. The UAR is born from the Pan-Arab Union of Egypt and Syria, and even after that union fractures, the name remains, and in football, the team is essentially Egypt. They are the power. They won the first 2 titles, 1957 and 59. They arrive in Addis Ababa as the reigning champions and as the center of gravity of early AFCON. They also arrive with an assumption that this is their tournament unless someone can take it from them. And now meet the Ethiopia's team, the side that will actually do it. The captain is Luciano Vassallo, a midfielder, leader, and personality who will become one of the defining figures of Ethiopian football history. Alongside him is his half-brother, Italo Vassallo. And if you think these names sound different than what you might have expected, it's because the 2 brothers were born in the 1930s when Ethiopia was a colony known as Italian Eritrea. Around the Vassallo brothers is a spine that feels like a club side as much as a national team, because early African national teams often are a small pool of elite players concentrated in a few domestic institutions. But the real architect on the Ethiopian side is on the bench, Yidnekatchew Tessema. If you only know him as the coach, you're missing this story, because Tessema becomes one of the most important administrators in African football history, a builder of institutions, a bridge into FIFA, and eventually a long-serving CAF president. In 1962, he's already doing what great football leaders do in underdeveloped environments. He's turning scarce resources into tactical clarity and belief. And the tournament itself is brutal in its simplicity. 4 teams, 2 semifinals, a third place match, and a final. No groups, no easing into it. Every match is essentially a referendum. And the atmosphere in Addis Ababa, as described by people who were there and by those who have tried to reconstruct it, is the kind of home crowd that doesn't just cheer, it carries the match. So let's play it. Semi-final 1, Ethiopia versus Tunisia. 30,000 people in the stands. And Tunisia hit first, early, and twice. After half an hour, Tunisia is up 2-0. This is the moment when you can feel the old fear in the stadium, that Ethiopia hosting is a celebration, until the football starts to punish them. But Ethiopia don't collapse. They respond, and immediately get a penalty, which Luciano Vassallo converts, 1-2. And a few minutes later they equalize. It's 2-2 at the break. And then they start to overwhelm Tunisia with momentum, the kind of wave that only exists when a host nation decides the match is no longer a contest, but a duty. By the end, Ethiopia wins 4-2, and they've done it from 2 goals down. That scoreline is the first warning to the rest of the tournament. This is not a ceremonial host, this is a contender. Semi-final 2, the holders do what holders do. The United Arab Republic beat the Protectorate of Uganda 2-1, not a demolition, a professional job. Uganda scored first, but UAR flipped it around, just like Ethiopia. And now the final is set. Ethiopia versus the United Arab Republic, hosts versus holders, underdog versus tradition, Addis Ababa versus Cairo by another name. And then there stands the pressure that comes when the country believes it is playing for more than a trophy. And the match unfolds like a classic. UAR strike first, shortly after the half-hour mark, 1-0 at halftime. The holders do what holders always try to do in a final, silence the crowd early, reduce the game to authority. And for a long time in the second half, it seems to work. But Ethiopia keep coming, and with 15 minutes left, the equalizer finally arrives. Tetle Kidane makes it 1-1. The stadium breathes again, but seconds later, literally, the UAR hit back 2-1. And this is the emotional cliff edge of the entire tournament. Ethiopia have climbed all the way here. Now the champions have reasserted themselves and look like they can run out the clock for a third straight trophy. But then comes the moment that turns the match from a final into folklore. 5 minutes from time, Yidnekatchew Tessema finds none other than Luciano Vassallo with a beautiful pass, and he doesn't miss. Ethiopia equalize. It's 2-2 at full time. The holders, for the first time in AFCON, are being made to feel doubt. And in extra time, the match breaks open in the most football way possible. Not with a perfect system, not with a master plan, but with a mistake. A defensive error, and Luciano's brother, Italo, punishes it 3-2. For the first time in the final, Ethiopia lead. And then deep into extra time, Mengistu Worku dribbles past 4 UAR players and finishes the job, 4-2. What a way to clinch the title. Then the stadium erupts. The trophy presentation becomes an image. Emperor Haile Selassie handing the cup to our friend Luciano, Ethiopia's captain. A state moment, not just a sports moment. And in that instant, Ethiopia become the 3rd AFCON champion and the first champion not named Egypt. That matters, because early AFCON is not just a list of winners. It's a contest over who defines the continent's football hierarchy. So what happens after? Well, in the short term, Ethiopia don't turn into a permanent superpower. They appear again. They host again. But the golden window narrows. By the end of the 1960s, Ethiopia's continental dominance fades, and for long stretches they become a sleeping historical giant, respected for the past, but struggling in the present. But the 1962 triumph still leaves a legacy in 2 channels. First, people. It creates legends like Vassallo and Worku. The names have become shorthand for what Ethiopian football could be, and it elevates Tessema, the institution builder who helped shape African football's place in the world for decades. And second, credibility. Because if CAF can stage a tournament and deliver a champion and build continental legitimacy, it strengthens the political argument African football is making in those years. We are not a developmental afterthought. We deserve representation. And this is where the broader global context matters. In the early 1960s, Africa has no guaranteed place at the FIFA World Cup. African nations are asked to fight through stacked qualification structures that treat a continent as a sidebar. And a few years later, African football responds the only way you can when power refuses to listen: collective action. The 1966 cycle became a breaking point. And by 1970, Africa finally has a guaranteed World Cup berth. So when you look at Ethiopia 1962, It's not only a host winning a final, it's part of a wider continental movement, build competitions, prove quality, and force recognition. And now fast forward to today. As this episode drops, AFCON Morocco 2025 just 3 days ago reached its own climax, Senegal defeating host Morocco 1-0 in Rabat. Modern African football is packed with global stars, diaspora pipelines, Champions League winners, and billion-dollar broadcast economies. Ethiopia, by contrast, sit in a more complicated modern position, a historic power with one AFCON title, 1962, but a national team that has struggled to stay present at the top table of CAF tournaments in recent decades. Their clubs have moments, St. George reaching the Champions League group stage, occasional shocks and flashes of heritage, but the continental elite tier is dominated by stronger leagues, deeper finances, and more stable infrastructure. And yet the point of 1962 is not that Ethiopia stayed on top forever. The point is that for 1 week in Addis Ababa, African football looked at itself and saw something new. A champion can come from anywhere, a host can become a power, a crowd can change the physics of a match, and a trophy can become a piece of national memory. So what should we take away from January 21, 1962? Yeah, you know it, 3 points. First, early tournaments are not less important because they are smaller. They're often more important because each match carries the weight of building legitimacy from scratch. Second, home advantage. In a young football ecosystem, it's not just atmosphere, it's identity. Ethiopia didn't just play a final. They turned the final into a national obligation, and they refused to lose it. Third, the real legacy of a title is not only medals, it's institutions. Ethiopia's 1962 story is also a story about leaders like Yidnekatchew Tessema, people who win a match and then help build a continent-wide football architecture that outlives them. On this day in 1962, Ethiopia didn't just win AFCON, they took the cup away from the holders, and they proved that Africa's football future would not be owned by one country, one region, or one tradition. It would be contested, and it would be earned. That's all for episode 82 of OTD. If you have an idea about a future episode, I want to hear from you. My email is otd@17lawsguy.com. Tomorrow, in episode 83, we go to 1942 and to Argentina 12, Ecuador 0, the largest winning margin in a Copa. See you then.